The rain was falling as if the sky had decided to spill all its secrets over the city. Heavy drops struck the massive glass panels of the 47th floor, sliding down like small, silent races toward nothing. The city below looked like a sea of blurry lights, distorted by the liquid curtain forming outside. Lara Martins stood near the conference table, her fingers slightly tensed around the folder she carried. The air inside that room was dense not because of the temperature. The climate control kept it perfectly comfortable because of his presence. Alexandre Donovan, seated behind a desk of black marble that reflected the cool ceiling light. He reviewed a contract with the calm of someone who had already held entire empires in his hands. His face, slightly tilted, revealed a firm jawline and chiseled features made to command. His eyes, gray and analytical, moved back and forth over the lines of the document with the precision of a sharp blade. Lara knew she shouldn't be watching, but it was impossible not to feel that silent magnetism. Every movement he made seemed calculated, as if even the way he held a pen was part of a power ritual. The expensive wristwatch caught the light discreetly, marking time with an almost imperceptible tick-tick. She shifted her weight from one leg to the other. Her low heel made a soft sound on the polished wooden floor. Alexandre lifted his gaze, and in that instant, the world seemed to narrow until it was reduced to the space between them. His gaze landed on her like a ray, not abrupt, but intense, as if piercing through layers of skin and thought. Lara held her breath. He wasn't just her boss. He wasn't just the man who defined the course of million-dollar contracts. He was also the man with whom she had shared a night that had changed everything. A night that now pulsed silently in the secret she carried. Her heart began to beat faster, as if it could be heard in the silent room. She clutched the folder to her body, trying to hide the slight tremor in her hands. His sent a mix of woody notes with an almost imperceptible hint of citrus, mingled with the distant aroma of freshly brewed coffee. "Is everything all right?" His voice broke the silence, deep and precise, but not hostile. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Yes, sir. It's been a long day." He nodded, returning his gaze to the contract. The soft sound of the pen sliding over the paper filled the space. Lara took a deep breath, trying to regain control, but part of her knew there was no going back. Each minute that passed made it more impossible to keep that secret. She no longer knew whether she feared his reaction more, or what would happen if she stayed silent. His reflection in the window glass seemed larger, almost a shadow cast over the city. A man who carried power in his hands and, without knowing it, a future growing inside her. She turned her eyes to the rain, seeking refuge in the chaotic dance of the drops. But the memories of that night in Paris came like flashes, the golden light reflecting on the Seine, his loosened tie, the unexpected laughter that made her forget for a moment who he was and who she was. Lara returned to reality at the sound of his voice calling her name. "Lara, tomorrow we need to discuss the New York trip. I want you to come along." Her body froze. A trip meant more time close to him, more risks, more looks that could say more than words. But she simply nodded. "Of course, sir." He lifted his gaze once more and held it on her for a second too long. A second in which she almost believed he knew. But then he returned to his work, as if nothing had happened. Deep down, Lara knew the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was about to form inside that room. And this storm had a name, a face, and a secret that, sooner or later, was going to explode. When the office door closed behind her, Lara felt as though she had left behind not just a workplace, but also a minefield where every step had to be calculated. The muffled sound of the rain still lingered, echoing faintly through the quiet corridors of Donovan Corp. As she walked down the long hallway lined with glass and steel, memories began to seep in, weaving a broader picture of who she was and how she had arrived there. Lara Martins, 27 years old, born and raised in a small town where the streets smelled of fresh bread in the morning and the church bell marked not only the time but the rhythm of life. Raised by her Aunt Amelia, a woman with rough hands and a stern gaze. Lara had learned early that nothing came for free. Amelia used to say, "Hope doesn't fill your plate," and that the only way to survive was through hard work. At 18, Lara traded the leafy square of her hometown for the gray streets of the capital. She carried more books than clothes in her suitcase and a shy dream of building something for herself. She worked as a sales clerk, a receptionist, and an administrative assistant until one job posting caught her attention: secretary at Donovan Corp. At the time, she had no idea who Alexandre Donovan was, only that the name carried weight. The hiring process was rigorous, but Lara made it through. And the moment she first stepped onto the 47th floor, she understood she was in a world that didn't belong to her. A world of expensive watches, cars that cost more than houses, and people who didn't look at you, they looked through you. Alexandre Donovan, 35 years old, son of a diplomat and an art gallery owner. He had grown up surrounded by travel and negotiations. He learned 5 languages before turning 20 and closed his first $1 million deal before 25. He hadn't inherited his fortune. He had built it, piece by piece, using intelligence as a tool and risk as fuel. In the company's hallways, people spoke of him with respect and a certain fear. Alexandra was known for making decisions that few would dare to make, choices that often seemed cold, but invariably led to victory. His gray eyes were like steel mirrors. They reflected everything, but revealed little. Lara noticed in her first days that he was a man who tolerated no mistakes. Every meeting was a test of nerves, every request a measure of competence. But, little by little, she began to notice hidden nuances. Once, she saw him stop to listen to a cleaning lady who asked for a day off to care for her sick grandson. He not only granted it, but also ensured she received a bonus at the end of the month. And there was that look sometimes. When it rested on Lara, it seemed to abandon the weight of numbers and contracts, revealing something more human. It was on a Friday, 3 months after she had been hired, that fate began to shift. An urgent trip to Paris. The negotiation was delicate, and Alexandre wanted someone he trusted to organize all the logistics. He chose Lara. She didn't know if it was a compliment or a test, but she accepted. The trip changed everything. Between meetings and formal dinners, there were also conversations that broke protocol. On the last day, after a dinner with investors, they walked along the banks of the Seine. The lights reflected on the water, and the illuminated Eiffel Tower stood in the distance like a golden beacon. Lara never managed to explain how that moment happened. Perhaps it was the comfortable silence, or the way he looked at her not as a boss, but as a man seeing a woman in front of him. A touch on her arm turned into fingers intertwining, and the first kiss felt like crossing a line that neither could erase. Back in the reality of the office, nothing was said, but everything had changed. Every interaction carried an invisible weight, a tension that grew each day. Now, walking back to her small office, Lara wondered how long she could continue living on this edge, between the professional and the personal, between the truth and the secret. Sitting at her desk, she opened her planner and began organizing the next day's appointments. Yet her eyes kept returning to the name that appeared repeatedly in her notes: Alexandre Donovan. She closed the planner with a sigh. Outside, the rain was easing, but inside her, the storm was only gaining strength. And deep down, Lara knew it wouldn't be long before the first spark found the right fuel. The night had given way to a gray morning, typical of winter in the city. Lara arrived early at the office, as always, but noticed something unusual. Alexandra's office door was open. He rarely arrived before her, but today he was already there, standing, gazing at the city through the glass wall. "Good morning, Mr. Donovan," she said, placing her bag on her desk. He merely nodded, without turning his face. His reflection in the glass showed a faint, almost imperceptible smile, as if he were lost in thoughts he couldn't share. "We have a meeting with the board at 9, she added, trying to keep her tone professional. "And after that?" he asked, turning to face her. His gaze was direct, but there was something more, a quiet curiosity. Lara opened her planner and began listing his appointments, but he interrupted. Cancel the 4 o'clock meeting. I need you to come with me to take care of something outside the company. She hesitated. It wasn't common for him to take her to matters unrelated to strictly corporate affairs. Of course, she replied, hiding her surprise. The morning went by in a blur of emails, phone calls, and documents. At 3:30, Alexandre appeared at her office door, dismissing his usual driver. He drove the car himself, a sleek black sedan, through the congested streets. At first, the silence in the car was comfortable, but after a few minutes, he asked, "Had you ever been to Paris before that trip?" Lara gave a slight smile, without taking her eyes off the road ahead. Never. It was memorable. He glanced at her quickly, before returning his attention to the traffic. For me too. The rest of the ride was filled with small exchanges, questions about personal tastes, childhood memories. It was as if, for a few moments, the ruthless billionaire had stepped aside, leaving only a man trying to know a woman. Their destination was a luxury hotel downtown, where a meeting with foreign investors was taking place. Lara organized documents, translated parts of the conversation, and, at the end, when everyone had left, Alexandre suggested they have dinner at the top-floor restaurant. The table by the window offered a panoramic view of the illuminated city. The air was infused with a delicate aroma of wine and spices. Lara tried to focus on the menu, but she felt the weight of his gaze on her. "Do you always keep this barrier, Lara?" he asked, his tone lower now, almost confidential. She looked up, puzzled. "What barrier?" "The one that keeps you from getting too close. It's as if there's an invisible line you're afraid to cross." Her heart sped up. "Maybe because I know that if I cross it, there will be no way back." For a moment, neither spoke. The distant sound of cutlery and low conversations seemed to dissolve, leaving only the heavy silence between them. "Some lines," he said, finally, "are worth crossing." Dinner went on with lighter conversation, but the subtext remained, pulsing. When he dropped her off at home that night, he stayed in the car for a few seconds, looking at her as if he wanted to say something. In the end, he simply said, "See you tomorrow, Lara." Days later, their closeness intensified. At the office, small gestures carried more meaning. The way he handed her a document, letting their fingers brush, the prolonged glance during a meeting, the faint smile when she said something witty. Then came the invitation for a second trip, again to Paris, to sign the contract they had discussed months earlier. Lara hesitated, remembering the last time they were there. But his firm voice left no room for refusal. Paris was cold, the streets bathed in the warm yellow light of the lampposts, exuding a nearly cinematic charm. After the signing event, Alexandre invited her for a more informal dinner, far from the watchful eyes of investors and colleagues. They walked along the banks of the Seine, their steps echoing on the pavements dampened by fine drizzle. The Eiffel Tower, glowing in the background, seemed to watch in silence. "Do you remember the last time we were here?" he asked, with a smile that betrayed the memory. Lara felt a different kind of chill run down her spine. "How could I forget?" He stopped walking and turned to her. The cold air formed small clouds in front of their breath. For a few seconds, they simply looked at each other, as if trying to figure out if the other was willing to take the next step. Then, Alexandre moved closer. His hand on hers was firm but unhurried. The kiss came as a natural continuation of that moment, loaded with everything they had avoided saying until then. When they pulled apart, she knew the line had been crossed and there was no going back. On the way back to the hotel, their hands remained intertwined in the back seat of the car. Neither of them spoke. There was no need. And it was there, under the Parisian sky, that fate began to write a chapter that would change not only their relationship, but both of their lives, forever. The weeks following their return from Paris felt like a silent game between the inevitable and the forbidden. In the office, Lara and Alexandre maintained the impeccable facade of boss and assistant. But all it took was an accidental touch, a glance held for a second too long, for memories of that night to come rushing back in full force. Yet life doesn't always allow moments to remain suspended in time. On a Saturday morning, Lara woke up feeling strangely different. The sun filtered through the curtains of her small apartment, but the light seemed sharper, almost aggressive. She got up slowly, her stomach churning as if something were out of place. The clock on the wall read 8:30 when she finally gathered the courage to walk to the pharmacy on the corner. The sound of the door chime seemed louder than usual. She bought what she needed without exchanging more than a couple of words with the clerk. Back in her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed with the small package in her hands. She took a deep breath, trying to ignore the fast rhythm of her heartbeat. She opened the box, followed the instructions, and waited. 2 minutes. She watched the display like someone watching a countdown to a sentence. The wall clock's second hand seemed to move faster, yet each second felt like an eternity. And then, the answer appeared. Clear, undeniable, positive. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Lara brought her hand to her mouth, trying to contain the storm of emotions inside her. Joy and fear clashed within her, like waves in a rough sea. She got up and began pacing from one side of the room to the other, trying to process it. Alexandre's image immediately came to mind. His intense gaze, his deep voice, his firm touch, and the inevitable question, what would he say? She knew that telling the truth meant opening doors that might never close again. Alexandre was a man used to controlling everything, to predicting every variable. But this was in no one's plans. She spent the rest of the weekend in silence, avoiding even messages from friends. On Monday, walking into the office, she felt as if she were carrying an invisible weight. Alexandre greeted her with the same calm demeanor as always, but Lara could no longer see him in the same way. Throughout the week, she avoided unnecessary interactions. She arrived earlier, left later, anything to reduce the time they spent alone together. But, ironically, this distance seemed to draw even more of his attention. On Friday, near the end of the day, as she organized some documents, she felt a slight wave of nausea. She tried to hide it, leaning over her desk. Alexandre, passing by the hallway, stopped immediately. "Are you all right?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "Yes, just a bit of a headache." He studied her for a moment, as if trying to decipher something, but didn't press further. When his door closed again, Lara exhaled slowly. She needed to think. She needed to decide. But the hours passed, and the courage never came. The following Saturday, the sound of her phone woke her early. It was a message from Alexandre. "On Monday, I want you ready to review an important contract with me. It will be confidential." The word confidential made her stomach tighten, not from nausea, but from the memory of the last time he had used that term. On Monday, as she entered his office to deliver some papers, she saw the folder on his desk, marked in red letters, confidential. Alexandre wasn't there. She was supposed to just drop off the documents and leave. But something about the way the folder was open, with the pages in plain view, made her stop. She took a step forward, another, and before she realized it, she was already reading. The content spoke of negotiations with a foreign conglomerate suspected of illicit practices. There were clauses mentioning personal guarantees and non-financial collateral. Words that, in the corporate world, carried veiled threats. Lara closed the folder, her heart racing. She didn't know which was more dangerous, the secret she carried or the one she had just uncovered about Alexandre. As she left the room, she felt a strange certainty. Her two worlds, the personal and the professional, were about to collide. And when they did, nothing would remain the same. That night, Lara could barely sleep. The words from the contract she had read without permission echoed endlessly in her mind. Personal guarantees, non-financial collateral. She didn't need to be a legal expert to understand that this wasn't just another risky business deal. There was real danger involved, and not just for Alexandre. She tossed and turned in bed, trying to find a comfortable position. but every movement seemed to bring back the weight of the two secrets she carried. One, alive and growing inside her. The other, cold and threatening, printed on letterhead and kept in his office. The next morning, when she entered the office, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. Alexandre was on the phone, speaking in English with a firmness that made the seriousness of the conversation unmistakable. Lara placed the documents on his desk and left quietly, but she couldn't help noticing how tightly he gripped his pen, almost as if he might break it. "Reschedule the board meeting for tomorrow," he said after ending the call, addressing her. "And call Mr. Navarro. Tell him I accept the deal, but only if he agrees to the additional clause." His tone left no room for questions, but Lara's mind was racing. Who was Navarro? And what was this clause that justified such enormous risk? Throughout the day, fragments of conversations reached her ears: foreign names, astronomical figures, tight deadlines. There were also discreet mentions of security and trust, words that, in this context, sounded more like veiled threats. That night, while reviewing the next day's agenda, Lara noticed a reminder scheduled for an out-of-town meeting, marked as private and without details. It wasn't common for Alexandre to withhold information from her, especially when she handled all the logistics. This could only mean one thing: there was something he didn't want her to know. In the following days, the distance between them became a strange dance. When they were together, the conversations were brief, direct, almost cold. But now and then, a gesture would break that barrier, like when he held the door for her, and for an instant, his hand brushed against hers. Or when, during a meeting, their eyes met, and he seemed to forget what he was saying for a few seconds. Still, Lara felt the wall between them growing taller, and she knew that wall was built of secrets his and hers. It was on a rainy Tuesday that the pieces began to shift. Lara was organizing some files when she received an internal envelope with no identified sender. Inside was just a single sheet of paper, with a sentence printed in capital letters. "You don't know who he really is." Her heart raced. She looked around, trying to spot who might have left it, but the hallway was empty. She slipped the paper into her desk drawer and tried to focus on work, but the sentence burned in her mind. At 6 in the evening, Alexandre appeared at her office door. "I need you to come with me now," he said, without giving any explanations. In the car, the silence was almost suffocating. The wet streets reflected the headlights, creating a surreal scene. Finally, he spoke. "There are things that happen behind the scenes that can't be put into reports or discussed in meetings. And sometimes, to protect what's ours, you have to negotiate with people you'd rather keep at a distance." She looked at him, trying to find answers in his tone. "And what's the cost of that?" she asked, almost without realizing it. He paused before replying. "The cost is taking risks that others wouldn't have the courage to face." They arrived at an unmarked, discreet building. Alexandre went inside, leaving her in the car with the driver. The clock ticked past 40 minutes before he returned, his face serious, his jaw tense. On the way back, they didn't exchange another word. But as they said goodbye in the company lobby, he stepped close enough for his voice to be almost a whisper. "One day, you'll understand why I do what I do." Lara stood there, watching him step into the elevator. Part of her wanted to trust him, to believe there was a good reason behind it all. But another part feared that, by the time she discovered the truth, it would be too late to turn back. And deep down, she knew the moment their secrets collided was getting closer and closer. That night, Lara lay in bed for hours, her eyes fixed on the dark ceiling. His words echoed in her mind. "One day, you'll understand why I do what I do." Was it a promise or a warning? She couldn't decide. Morning brought with it a different kind of weight in the air. When she arrived at the office, she noticed Alexandre was already there, locked away in his office. As usual, the door stayed closed. The day dragged on slowly, with her trying to lose herself in routine tasks to keep from thinking too much. Shortly before the end of the workday, she heard his office door swing open sharply. Alexandre stepped into the hallway, holding a black folder. His eyes were harder than she had ever seen them. "Lara, come in." He closed the door behind her, the metallic click echoing like a period at the end of a sentence. He placed the folder on his desk and opened it, revealing the same contract she had seen days before. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice low but loaded with authority. Laura's heart began to race. For a moment, she thought he was talking about the pregnancy. The words started spilling out before she could stop them. "It's not just about what I know, it's about what I'm carrying." Alexandre frowned, clearly confused. "What are you carrying?" She hesitated, realizing they were speaking about two entirely different secrets. The silence between them grew thicker, as though both were waiting for the other to reveal theirs first. Lara looked away, fixing her eyes on the reflection of the lights on the marble desk. "I saw the contract," she admitted at last. "I know you're dealing with dangerous people." He remained still, his eyes locked on her. Then he took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair. "And what else do you think you know?" His tone wasn't challenging, but measuring, like he was assessing how far she could go without getting lost. "All I know is it doesn't seem safe. For you. For anyone." Alexandre stood and walked over to the window. The city stretched out before him, a sea of nighttime lights. He placed his hands on the glass, as if drawing strength from it. "It's not a question of safety, Lara. It's a question of survival. There are deals that can't be broken without lives being destroyed." The words hung in the air, heavy with something she couldn't quite decipher. "And you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you willing to destroy yourself in the process?" He turned toward her, and the intensity in his gaze made her step back. "If it's to protect what's mine, yes." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of a phone ringing somewhere in an empty office. Lara could feel the weight of her own breathing. She wanted to speak. She wanted to tell him that inside her was someone who was also part of what was his. But the moment felt wrong, suffocated by the gravity of the conversation. "Promise me you won't get more involved than you already are," she finally asked. Alexandre didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her, as if memorizing every detail of her face. Then, with slow steps, he approached until he was standing right in front of her. His voice, when it came, was deep and controlled. "You don't understand, Lara. There's no such thing as more or less involvement for me. There's only what needs to be done." He walked past her and opened the door, ending the conversation abruptly. Lara stepped out, feeling the weight of what hadn't been said in every step she took. Back at her desk, she sat down and let her head fall into her hands. Each day, the secrets they kept seemed closer to exploding. And when they did, she knew nothing could ever go back to the way it was. The rest of the week passed with an uneasy silence between Lara and Alexandre. In the office, the atmosphere was almost deafening, as if each of them were waiting for the other to make the next move. She buried herself in work, but the tension didn't ease. On Friday, most employees had already left for the day when Lara decided to stay late to organize some reports. The hallway was quiet, and only the soft light from her office illuminated part of the floor. That was when she felt a strange sensation, the unsettling feeling of being watched. At first, she thought it was just paranoia, till she heard footsteps in the hallway. She turned and looked through the glass door. No one was there. Still, the unease grew. She gathered her things and shut down her computer, determined to leave. When she reached the parking garage, the cold night air made her pull her coat tighter around herself. She walked toward her car, but a quick movement to her left caught her attention. A shadow, footsteps matching her own pace. "Alexandre," she called out, knowing it was unlikely to be him. No answer. She quickened her pace, the sharp sound of her heels hitting the floor mixed with the echo of footsteps behind her. Before she could get into her car, a firm hand gripped her arm. Lara gasped, ready to scream it, till she heard a deep, urgent voice. "Don't look back." It was Alexandre. He wore a dark overcoat, and his eyes were more intense than she'd ever seen them. He quickly led her to a black car parked near the exit, opened the door, and practically placed her in the back seat. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. He shut the door and got in beside her. "They want to use you to get to me." "Who are they?" she pressed. Alexandre looked away, as if unwilling to reveal more than necessary. "People for whom a contract isn't just paper. People who believe that if they can't get what they want from me, they can get it through you." The car sped off, the city lights blurring past the window. Lara tried to process everything, but fear was settling deep within, her not just for herself, but for the baby she carried. Finally, she understood she couldn't keep it hidden any longer. She turned to him, her voice breaking. "Alexandre, I'm pregnant. It's your child." The silence that followed was so dense, it seemed to compress the air inside the car. He kept his gaze fixed ahead for a few seconds that felt like hours. When he spoke, his voice was low, but heavy with emotion. "You should have told me sooner. I didn't know how. I thought it would be safer this way." He looked at her then, and there was something different in his eyes, a mixture of shock, vulnerability, and determination. "Nothing is more important to me now than protecting the two of you." Lara felt the weight of those words. He hadn't said protect you or protect the baby. He said the two of you, as if he already saw a shared destiny. The car stopped in front of a discreet residential building. Alexandre led her up to an apartment on the top floor. The space was modern but warm, with large windows overlooking the lit-up city. "You're staying here for now," he said. "It's safe, and you?" she asked. "I'm going to take care of this." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that he was capable of facing any danger. But when she saw him looking out the window, his hands clenched at his sides, she understood he was ready to put himself between her and any threat even, if it meant putting his own life at risk. That night, Lara stood by the window, gazing at the distant city. She felt the baby move, as if to remind her silently that time was passing, and every decision now carried double the weight. Behind her, Alexandre approached and placed his hands on her belly, an unexpectedly tender yet firm gesture. "This changes everything," he said, "and at the same time, it changes nothing. I was already willing to fight to the end. Now, I just have one more reason." Lara closed her eyes, allowing herself, for a brief moment, to believe that despite everything, they might have a future. But deep down, she knew, before any happy ending, they would still have to weather a storm. And that storm was already on the horizon. The days that followed in the safe apartment were strangely quiet. Outside, the city continued its frantic rhythm, but for Lara, the world seemed to have shrunk to those walls. The distant sound of traffic and the nighttime glow of lights filtering through the windows. Alexandre came and went, always late at night, his face carrying the shadow of conversations he didn't share. She could tell from the way he removed his coat and the long silences that there was more happening than he was willing to reveal. On the third night, he arrived earlier. Lara was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, flipping through a book without really reading the words. When he walked in, closing the door behind him, there was something different in his gaze. It wasn't just fatigue, was decision. "It's settled," he said, taking off his jacket and placing it over the chair. "Settled?" she asked, standing up, trying to read in his eyes what that meant. He stepped closer and took her hands. "The deal is done, and the threats, they won't touch you anymore." Lara wanted to believe him, but still she asked, "And the cost?" He hesitated for a moment, as if weighing what he should or shouldn't say. "The cost was high, but nothing I wasn't willing to pay." She realized pressing for details would lead nowhere. Sometimes protection came with silence, and she was willing to accept that at least for now. Alexandre slipped an arm around her shoulders and guided her to the window. The city stretched out before them, alive and distant. "You know what I've learned in these past few days?" he asked, looking at the horizon. "That all the power, all the money, and all the contracts in the world mean nothing if you don't have someone to protect." Lara felt the weight and truth of his words. She placed her hand over his, resting on her belly, in a silent gesture that spoke louder than any response. That night, they had dinner together, laughing for the first time in days. There were no guarantees for the future, only the certainty that they would face whatever came together. When she lay down later that night, she listened to the soft sound of his breathing beside her. For the first time in a long while, she fell asleep without the weight of uncertainty pressing on her chest. Days later, they returned to the office. Routines resumed, but now there was something different in the air. The looks they exchanged carried a shared understanding no one else seemed to notice. At the end of a meeting, Alexandre approached her and spoke quietly, just for her to hear. "Our secret is no longer yours or mine, it's ours, and it will always be protected." Lara smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She knew challenges still lay ahead, that nothing would be simple. But she also knew she was no longer alone. As he walked away to speak with another executive, she thought about the path that had brought them here. From that first look in the silent office to the moment she confessed the truth in the car, every step had been marked by difficult choices and calculated risks. And, deep down, she realized something she had never put into words. Some secrets destroy, others save, and theirs had done both. Lara returned to her desk, the soft sound of rain beginning to patter against the windows. She smiled discreetly. The storm had passed in, even if another came. She now knew she could face it. Sometimes, life takes us down paths we would never have planned. Lara and Alexandre learned that true love isn't just about moments of happiness, but about facing together the storms that threaten to destroy everything. They discovered that protecting someone goes far beyond words. It's about being there, even when everything feels uncertain. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. We tell every detail for you, and it's with you that we share every emotion. If this narrative touched your heart, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next stories we've prepared for you. I truly want to know, if you were in Lara's place, would you have told the truth from the start, or would you have done the same? Leave your comment tile. Be delighted to read your opinion. And if you want to keep feeling this same connection, click now on the next video here on the channel. We have stories that will move you from beginning to end. Here at Lasting Tales, every story leaves marks that time cannot erase. We'll see you in the next one.